Mr. Brian Supko, thank you very much for joining me on the fourth episode of Getting to Know You. So let's do just that. Where were you born, sir?
Hey, Tim, and thanks for having me on. I was born in Quantico, Virginia, to a Marine family. My father was in the Marine Corps, and we stayed there probably for about a year, and then I moved to Hawaii shortly after. I guess kind of the typical life of a military background. So, but that's where I was born, and I moved around a bunch until I was about in high school, and I spent all of my high school career, and my parents were there while I was in college as well, but that was in Oceanside, California. So that's kind of where I call where I'm from, because that's where I spent the most time at any one time, at any given period of time while I was growing up.
What was your father's rank in MOS when you were born?
When I was born, he was a captain in the Marines, and he was a artilleryman. And then he continued to do that, and he continued on and retired as a colonel, '06 full bird colonel in the Marines.
Okay. Did your mother work?
My mom worked mostly stuff on the side because we were moving around quite a bit. So she started off working like at a athletic club when we were in one place, and then as we moved around, she took different things, and she sort of ended up working in some retail spaces in some of the bases that we were stationed at, because frankly, some of them were overseas, whether it be Korea or Okinawa. And so she worked kind of in the retail where some of the host nation countries could then touch American customers through selling stuff on the base. So yeah, she did work, but she was primarily a stay-at-home mom.
Okay. Did your father ever deploy while you were young and bouncing around the world?
He did. He deployed when I was, I guess the first one was when I first entered. I guess I should say he deployed when I was really young, and I don't really remember it. But he was part of an exchange Marine program in Israel, and so he was sort of on short deployments there. But I was pre-kindergarten, so I didn't quite grasp that. The first real deployment that he took was while I was in when I first started high school, and he went to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and was gone for the entire freshman year of my high school career, which was probably good and bad. I was a pimply faced little kid, and just trying to figure myself out. But definitely a formidable year for him to miss for sure.
Sure. Now, bouncing around all that time, I imagine it's pretty tough to build relationships with friends that you can't maintain bouncing across the world. How was growing up in that system?
It was somewhat fluid when I was really young. I would say until I was in like sixth grade, maybe. It was pretty easy because you would just kind of leave in the summer when everybody was out of school anyway, so you didn't see most of your school friends, and you just kind of showed up somewhere new. When I got into sixth and seventh grade, I started to make some real friendships and relationships, and that became kind of hard to maintain. And I'll never forget when I left eighth grade. I was in Alabama, and I was moving back to California, and we were like, man, we're never gonna forget each other. We're never gonna grow apart, and we were writing letters to each other every like couple weeks, and we talked as much as we could. And then obviously a year or two later, it started to fade off. And strangely enough, I've actually reconnected with that person years and years later, but virtually nobody else. And so it was really hard to maintain friendships, and certainly none that I've had, you know, that I've had for a long, long time. But it really wasn't too bad until I got to be, I guess, around junior high school.
Okay. And from that point, were you drawn to anything academically, or what was, I guess, your main concern growing up in those days?
I really gravitated towards sports. I had a lot of fun doing that, and it was partly because of the kids that I would, happen to be around at the time. So when I was in kindergarten, all we did was play sports in the cul-de-sac, and so that kind of started me off. And then any kind of fun stuff like that, or riding bikes, or going around in packs, just doing stuff. So it was really just about going around and doing a bunch of things with friends, and then I mean, that sort of gravitated to as I was growing up. I kind of wanted to be, one of the following. I wanted to be a professional sports player. I wanted to be a race car driver. I wanted to be a stuntman because I'd seen a TV show about stuntmen, growing up. I wanted to be a pilot and, or I wanted to be like an actor or something. So I guess, catching one of your top five ain't bad as I ended up becoming a helicopter pilot in the Army.
Sure, sure. Did you go directly into college from high school?
I did. I did. I went to the United States Military Academy at West Point, and that was a weird decision for me because it was my father was in the Marines. A number of my family members had all gone to the Naval Academy, and I just sort of ended up gravitating to West Point, and maybe a little bit out of teenage spite, for your parents. You decide to go to maybe their rival school or something. But I thought maybe I was really putting some pain to my father by going to West Point instead of the academy that he had gone to. But turns out that's not such a terrible thing to do to your family. But yeah, that's where I ended up.
Did the old devil dog have issues with you making that decision?
Aside from the competitive Army versus Navy stuff, which just happened this past weekend with the Army Navy football game, that's really about it. And he actually my father was a very very good lacrosse player, and he's he's in the college lacrosse Hall of Fame. And so growing up on the West Coast, lacrosse hadn't made it out there yet in the '80s and early '90s, and so I never really touched a lacrosse stick. And so there was I guess there was some underlying expectation maybe for me to play lacrosse at the Naval Academy, and they were interested in me doing that. And frankly, I hadn't touched a lacrosse stick, so it kind of made it hard for me to have that same interest. And but no, my family was very supportive of me going to West Point to pursue the entrance into the military world, but also to play baseball, at a high level in college Division 1.
Okay. And then what happens upon graduation from West Point? What's next?
So you graduate after 4 years, and you get a little bit of vacation to kind of get all your stuff and sort of make your way to your first duty station. For most branches and most military occupational specialties, they will go directly to their post that they're going to be assigned to, and then they'll usually go to what's called the officer basic course. Except for aviation, you go to a very specific place called Fort Rucker, Alabama. And that's where the U.S. Army Flight School is located. And so all aviation officers or warrant officers show up there, and that's where they start their training, but they don't know where they're going yet, and they don't know what aircraft they're going to be in yet. And that's all tied to how they do in their order of merit when they graduate. So we went there, and after 18 months of flight school and essentially more studying and work, I was able to secure the aircraft that I wanted, which was the OH-58D Kiowa Warrior, which is no longer in service in the U.S. Army in the active duty. And then and my first duty choice or my first location choice of Schweinfurt, Germany, which was a really neat thing for me, considering I'd never gone anywhere in Europe with my father while he was in the Marine Corps.
So walk me through, is it OCS?
OCS is the Marine Corps version of this. So Officer Basic Course,
Okay.
OBC. That is where they sort of teach you to be a young junior officer in the military. So the Army schooling paradigm is every time you get a promotion, you go to a school to teach you how to operate at the next level that you're about to obtain. So, you graduate from college, you get promoted to second lieutenant, you go to this officer basic course. So you do that for a little bit longer, you get promoted to captain, then you go to what's called the captain's career course. And then you go to the next one, and it's called the command general and staff course, so on and so on, all the way to the war college. And then there's levels of instruction for general officers beyond that. But the basic course it's exactly that. You learn how to do physical training, learn how to teach physical training, learn how to handle weapons if you hadn't done any of that previously. All of that because, getting commissioned into any of the branches of service, You don't necessarily have to come from a service academy where, where you might have a little bit more access to things like rifle ranges and just basic military drill and ceremony type disciplines. You could come from San Diego State or, University of Connecticut, from an ROTC program, and then walk in. And so basic genesis of the officer basic course is to get everybody kind of on the same page of being an entry level Army officer in that specific branch that they're about to serve in.
Were you in aviation already in Germany, or did that come later?
No, as soon as I graduated West Point, I was branched to aviation, and then as I graduated flight school, then I was a rated aviator in aviation, and from there I went to Germany. So when I showed up in Germany, I was already a basic pilot that was rated in, essentially the aircraft that they had at the flight school.
And that was, you said, OH-58?
Yeah, it's called the OH-58 Delta. It's OH-58D Kiowa Warrior, and it's a small helicopter. It's kind of built off of a Bell 407 or a Bell 412, and it had an observation ball. It was kind of a reconnaissance helicopter, and it had this observation ball on the top that looked sort of like ET. If you didn't have anything else to reference into, and I'm showing my age now by talking about the movie ET. But yeah, that was the helicopter. It was, like I mentioned, it was small. It was for reconnaissance, and really neat aircraft to fly in, especially right out of flight school.
Were those solo flights, or you had a co-pilot?
So it is a single pilot aircraft, but every time you fly, for the most part in the Army, you have two pilots in the helicopter.
Okay, was it side by side, or was the extra pilot behind you?
Oh, good question. Yeah, it is side by side, and there's two sets of flight controls on that are there, so either side can fly. And in this particular aircraft, the person in the left seat, if they weren't flying, they could operate the observation ball that was sitting on top of the helicopter. So, I spent a lot of time trying to maneuver that ball and have observation of different things, while the controls for that were connected to what's called the cyclic, which is the piece where you use your hand to essentially maneuver the helicopter. And so while that thing's moving left, right, forward, or backwards, you're trying to manipulate the controls for that observation ball and keep it still. So it took a little bit of training and a little bit of getting used to.
I'm sure it did. Tell me what you can about your first duty station there in Germany. What were you flying daily, weekly? What was that assignment?
Yeah, so I was there as a platoon leader, and we had I would say probably about 20 guys, 10 or 12 pilots, and another 8 or so crew chiefs. You're there, you're a young manager of people. And so I was doing two things. I was learning from sort of my right-hand man, and that person to a young platoon leader is called a platoon sergeant. And so those two individuals are kind of the ones that are responsible for all the actions of the platoon. Usually a platoon sergeant is a seasoned non-commissioned officer who's been in the Army for at least 10 years. And the platoon leader is a young, just out of college usually, or just out of the officer basic course, who's probably been in the Army for about 2 years or less. It's kind of a unique way that they pair those two, so that you can learn a lot as a young officer, and then you have somebody with experience that you can sort of entrust and ask about how to do things to kind of help you develop your leadership style. So I walked into that, and then I had a very, very good platoon sergeant there to join me and kind of help show me the ropes. And then he really helped it so that our platoon did a lot of things very well, and that gave me the freedom to fly a pretty decent amount and hone my skills as a pilot, as well as become a young leader in the Army.
What year would this have been?
This was in January of 2000.
So early 2000. Did you end up deploying anywhere from Germany?
So I was in Germany on September 11th, 2001, and I was on a flight actually, and I got out of the helicopter, I was with a few other pilots, and we started walking towards the hangar. Our phones started just buzzing like crazy. So we all started answering our phones, and people were saying, so we didn't know what was happening. And people were saying, there's been an airplane crash into the World Trade Center, blah, 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 blah. And so we immediately, we ran to our cars, tried to get to a TV somewhere where we could see what's happening. And from there, we watched, I watched the second plane hit the towers. And that's when I knew that, my life was going to change in terms of what my career, what my, Army life was going to be in the very near future. So we
Right.
immediately prepared to deploy, and we started to do it. And then for one reason or another, the particular unit that I was in kind of stood down on their deployment. And so that was a little bit disappointing for me. I mean, because I was, a young and very eager, young leader, and I wanted to go and defend my country, especially against what happened. And that sort of led me to. I always wanted to try out for what's called the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, which are the guys that initially probably got known or recognized from the movie Black Hawk Down.
Is that movie when you first learned about them, or did you know about them before from school?
No, I think that was the first time I knew exactly like who they were and what they flew. They flew a Little Bird in that movie, and obviously they flew a Black Hawk. And so that was kind of the first time I realized who they were. And then from that moment on, the minute that I knew I was going to be in the Army, I knew that I wanted to be a pilot. And the minute that I earned it, earned the privilege to go to flight school and become a pilot, as soon as I knew I was going to be a pilot, I wanted to earn my way to be in that unit. There I was, a very young captain after being in Germany for a couple of years, and I wanted to go try out and join that unit. And when we couldn't deploy there as the Army unit that I was in at the time, that just motivated me to try to get there a little bit sooner.
And how quickly did that happen for you?
I tried out in October of 2003, and I was at the unit shortly after the New Year in 2004.
What's a
So
tryout for that?
the tryout for the 160th is it's pretty straightforward. It's a week-long assessment, and they assess you on your physical skills. They assess you on your piloting skills. They assess you on your leadership skills if you're an officer. They assess you on your teaching skills if you're a warrant officer. And then they have a number of different activities that they put you through, or tests, I should say. And I can't really elaborate on all of it, but what I can say is that after a week of doing that, you are completely taxed out and just exhausted, both mentally and somewhat physically. And so at the end of all that, they put you in front of a board that reviews your performance over the week and gives you very, very honest, blunt, and straightforward feedback about your strengths and, more importantly, your weaknesses. So when you finish that board, you know that you are like, everything that you've done good in your career, and you know even more about what you need to work on. It's a bit of you feel pretty vulnerable at times, and it's a really, really a daunting assessment. And so for me, it was on my assessment ended on Halloween Day, and I was going to be the last assessment board of the week. And so I sort of had this thought. I was like, man, these guys have families, got kids. They're going to want to get done, and they're going to want to go see their kids and go trick or treating. And I think my board started at 4 o'clock. And I mean, at 6 p.m., I looked at my watch and I was not done. And they were not done critiquing me on the things that I needed to do better in my aviation career. So at that moment, I knew that, the people of that unit, whether it be Christmas, Halloween, whatever the mission is, they were not going to cut it short. They were gonna make sure they took care of it all the way to completion. And through that 2-hour board, somehow on the backside, I came out with an acceptance letter, and a report date for like 3 months later.
Okay. Are there certain specific physical characteristics required for helicopter pilots that may be different from jet fighters?
It's I guess at the baseline, it's all the same. I mean, you need to have good vision. All your faculties need to be in order. if you go onto the fixed wing side, say like the Navy or the Air Force, and you fly in a jet fighter, you go into other things that you learn how to deal with physically, like G forces and stuff like that. And we don't really have to deal with any of that on the helicopter side. So I can't speak to it, particularly, but at least from the beginning, it's the entry level flight physical is pretty much the same. They mostly want to make sure that your hearing is good, your eyes are good, all your other mental and physical faculties are intact, and then you kind of go forward from there.
I've not been in any military helicopter. Is there height or weight specifications that may affect your capacity to perform?
So there's can't be too you can be too tall, I suppose, but I've seen some pretty tall people squeeze into a helicopter. And even if the shortest of short people have found their way to make it work as well. So I'm sure there are numbers, and I just don't remember what they are. But there's kind of a place for everybody in terms of that. But what does come into play is the height and weight standards for whatever branch of service that you're in, and each of them vary just maybe a little bit here and there. But to be in any branch of service in the military, you have to meet height and weight specifications, meaning that if you're 6 feet tall, and you can't be more than 220 pounds, and if you are, you're going to get measured, and they'll do a fat body index test and stuff like that. And it's mostly just to make sure that you'll be able to handle the physical requirements that each military branch of service undergoes while they're doing their job.
So early 2004, I believe you said you get an acceptance letter to a special forces unit. What rank are you at that point? And tell me a little bit of what you can about your career progression, the first duty station in the 160th and on.
Sure. So I'm a young captain. I'm probably there a bit sooner than I expected. So I'm really excited too. I'm really nervous, and I show up to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which is one of the three posts for the 160th, and the other two are Savannah, Georgia, and Fort Lewis, or Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington State. I kind of you show up, and you get signed into the unit. So now you're administratively assigned, and then you start what's called Green Platoon, which is sort of like an advanced version of the officer basic course that I was telling you about before. And the way that they treat that is, they get pilots from all different walks of life in all different places across the Army, and they also get enlisted soldiers and non-commissioned officers of every different branch, all come into this unit to do things, to perform some sort of duty for the unit. And so, not knowing everybody's experience level, and different units have different standards, they basically created their own baseline of standards for both combat skills and for flight skills. First, you start off on the combat skills side, to where you basically establish yourself to the basic level that they require on first aid, hand-to-hand combat, weapons, small arms weapons deployment and use, physical fitness, whether it be the push-ups, sit-ups, and the physical fitness test requirements, or road marches and ruck marches, as well as a little bit longer runs. You go through all that stuff, as well as land navigation. Once you complete that portion, everybody is deemed to be on the baseline requirement for being a combat skilled soldier within the unit. Then, if you are a non-pilot, you go on to your unit, and you start to do your job at the 160th. I think there's probably 38 or so different military occupational specialties in this one aviation unit. So, it's a complete ecosystem all in its own. It's got everything from, it's got its own personnel, its HR department, a intelligence department, a operations. It's got supply and logistics, communications and IT. All of that reside, and it's also got its own medical, its own lawyer and legal advisors. So all of that exists, and I haven't even talked about pilots yet. So they all get into their part of the unit. But if you're a pilot, then you go into what's called advanced skills, and that's where you go to the aircraft that you've been selected to fly for the unit, and you go and you become what they call basic mission qualified on that aircraft. You can do that in a Chinook, in the Little Bird, or a Black Hawk. And I was selected by that unit to fly Chinooks, which was new to me because I was obviously flying a pretty small helicopter in Germany, and the Chinook is the biggest helicopter in the Army inventory.
I was going to say
So
that's quite a jump from the little bubble, the little flying
yeah,
bubble.
absolutely. So it took a little bit of getting used to. Took a number of flights to get qualified and just make the transition from one type of aircraft to another, and then I spent probably about 4 or 5 months just perfecting the basic skills of that helicopter in order to pass a check ride that would then allow me to join one of the line units, one of the units that deploy and act on behalf of the unit. And there is where you get your real advanced training and where the rubber meets the road on how to perform in that unit. And so this would be somewhere in the middle of 2005 now, and I get to my unit outside of Green Platoon training. Almost immediately, I start getting prepared for a deployment to Afghanistan. Once you join the unit, it's pretty much you knew that you were going to get a deployment sooner or later. I deployed. I got there towards the middle of the end of the middle half of the year, and before Christmas, I was in Afghanistan in 2005.
What's a full payload on a Chinook?
It varies on a couple different factors. One, it depends on where you are geographically and kind of the environment that you're in, how much fuel you have, and then how much cargo you're trying to move. I'll give you an example. If we'll say 40 people, you could probably fill your gas tanks to about 3/4 full, which would probably give you about 3 hours of flight time with 40 people that are about 200 pounds or so.
Well, tell me what you can about that first little vacation to Afghanistan.
Yeah, so I had not been to Afghanistan before, and so I got there and I was anxious. Obviously, I was nervous and excited as well. But I got there and it was probably the darkest place I've ever seen. We flew at night, and our night vision goggles, which it doesn't provide artificial light when you're looking at something. It takes whatever night vision goggles take whatever ambient light that is out there, and it amplifies it in these tubes that you are looking through so that you can see. But when it is completely zero light out there, it just kind of looks like a green version of the old TVs when you didn't have a good channel, and
Right.
you just have snow everywhere on the TV.
Right.
It kind of just looks like that while you're flying. And so it was really, really alarming to me how dark it was, and also how underdeveloped the country was. We spent a lot of time just moving special operations ground forces wherever they needed to go so they could perform their mission, and then obviously going to get them when they needed to be extracted. I would say maybe the most one of the most memorable things about that first deployment was we were in a place probably about 30 to 40 minutes away from our base called Bagram, and we were just going out somewhere, and we were just kind of doing a flight of moving stuff around, not necessarily anything significantly mission related. We were just kind of moving some stuff around for people that were already out and about, and we were going to get gas at this place, and there was a Marine who had gotten shot doing something, and he was laying on the operator's table, and they were running out of blood. It was too dark for any of the medevac helicopters to go out and fly that night, so they weren't expecting anybody to be around. And when we came in to get gas, they basically asked us if we could take them back, because they were going to run out of medical supplies to take care of this Marine. What was going to be a normal night of just kind of flying stuff around turned into a medical evacuation of a Marine who was, pretty close to passing on this operating table in a
Right.
remote base out in Afghanistan. So then we threw him in. Everybody's, obviously the intensity of our flight, climbed a few notches. We jumped in and flew directly over a mountain peak, that was ahead of us, and tried to cut the distance between us and Bagram Air Base, and and climbed a 18 or 19,000 foot peak, and then descended into Bagram to get this Marine to safety. Pretty neat thing to do, and he survived, and he went on and had a great career. But it was that was certainly a very fulfilling thing for my first deployment into Afghanistan.
Without a doubt. Do you have to call and ask permission or just say, hey, I've got a guy, we're coming?
It's probably a little bit of both, but one of the things that they teach you and entrust you to do as an air mission commander, which I was at the time, is to make some of those decisions on your own. And so this one obviously was not that hard to do. There are certainly much more, gray area decisions that are out there, but this one was, pretty easy. There's an American soldier, life, limb, or eyesight type of incident, and we needed to get him back to a medical facility as soon as possible. And the fact that nobody else was going to come really kind of narrowed down the options, obviously.
Right.
And
Right.
so we just took it upon ourselves to grab him. And I mean, we immediately called back on a satellite radio and said, "Here is the situation. Here are the actions that we're preparing to do. Obviously, if you disagree, let us know." But and my boss back at the command post did not disagree, and gave us the permission to expedite and get back as soon as we could, so we could get that Marine to a hospital.
Is there anything else similar or interesting that you can share about that deployment?
I'm on that first one. That was really about it. We did a number of things out there, but it's a pretty simple operation at large. If you take away the details that most people can't talk about, it's really just about putting special operations forces in the places that they need to be right on time in order to synchronize effects on a target or on the enemy, and then being able to get them out of that target area, whether it be under duress or under normal conditions. And and you get a little bit of both. Sometimes the target goes great, and they just walk out to a landing zone, and you go pick them up and go home. And sometimes you have to jump. You have to get into a place where people are getting shot at, and people are running around all over the place, and they come on, and you have to sift through that confusion and make sure you have everybody, and then get out of there as fast as humanly possible. You always hope for the easy night, but sometimes you end up with a tougher night than that.
How long, if it generally, this may not be a blanket answer, but were the operations, was it hours you dropped the guys off and you come back that night, or was it a few days, or how did that normally play out?
Well, it normally was based off of trying to do it all under the cover of darkness, just because that's the advantage that we had, with our technology. It could be a couple of hours, or it could take essentially the entire nighttime period of darkness to do the mission. And then sometimes when contingencies arose, sometimes it lasted well into daylight, but that's just not, we usually just did not plan for that. But we were always prepared for it, but that was usually not the plan.
So you get back refueled, ready to go whenever the call comes in?
Absolutely.
Gotcha. Now, how many times did you go play in the desert?
Um, I think my Department of Defense Form 214 says 13 or 14 times. Now that's because being on, with the people that I deployed with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, they don't deploy for the typical 6 months or a year at any given time. We usually had more high intensity, short duration deployments that were a little bit more focused on specific outcomes. And the other part of that is because we would have to be proficient and qualified on all environments of flight. And so if we spent 12 months in the desert, we would come home and we would not be qualified nor current any longer on, over water, urban environments in the jungle, mountains or snow, stuff like that. So we would always do a few months here or there and then come back so that we could stay qualified on the other environments, because we have a requirement to be available to the president or the secretary of defense when needed.
What was the progression of your career? I know at one point you ended up on an exercise in New Orleans.
I essentially started off as a platoon leader, again as a captain, and then I progressed through a company commander, a operations officer, an executive officer, a kind of a staff operations officer, and then I culminated as a battalion commander of one of the battalions of the unit. While you're there, if you're not deploying, you are practicing essentially, and you're training with one of the same customers that you would normally deploy with. And the customers generally go and they practice their craft wherever they can find the resources and find ways to replicate places that they're going to need to do their job. Kind of like we mentioned before, one of those happened to be, operating in and around, the sporting areas around New Orleans and also in that urban environment. We got a very, very neat opportunity to fly all around the New Orleans area and got to land in the areas of the Superdome.
What is the administrative headaches preceding such an operation?
Well, you have the general public. We don't normally give them too much of a heads up for two reasons. One, you don't want to scare them, and you also don't want to create a bunch of attention for what you're doing. We end up doing a lot of coordination with the city and with the officials and the police, and we just kind of try to make it so that we don't have try not to have a negative effect on what's going on. And we also we also do it so we can find out if there's something going on that we need to avoid in order to not disrupt something that's going on in the city. Like, obviously we wouldn't have gone and done that training if there was a football game that was going to be played, in the dome that weekend. But you always run into people that find out one way or another that you're there, and they always try to come observe what's happening. And sometimes they can be in the way.
What was your career path from your first trip to Afghanistan up to that point, all the way to retirement?
A couple deployments as a platoon leader, and then I came back and took a leadership position that wasn't necessarily a flying position for a while, and I was a commander of a headquarters company, and that was more of just leading a bunch of different soldiers with different military occupational specialties that supported the flying and supported the 160th. And then I got back into a flying position as a company commander, and then that was deploying. That was deploying as a pilot. It was also sending others to deploy, which as a leader is it's almost harder to send other people into danger than to go in yourself, and that's a strange burden that leaders and commanders go through. But it's obviously it's a necessary evil of being in a unit that constantly deploys. As a major and a company commander, I deployed a number of times, and then moved over again into a staff position as an operations officer, where I didn't deploy as much, but I still would go deploy. And when you deploy in those positions, you're usually manning the command post. You may be overseas doing something, but you're not necessarily flying as much. Now you get to watch everybody else go flying, and you have to stay back and man the command post, which is not as much fun, but it's still a necessary job to do in order to achieve the mission. And then moving from there into a battalion commander position, you get to do a lot of flying, but you don't do a lot of the missions. Again, you're back in the command post, directing all kinds of activities that are happening, maybe not necessarily just the flying, and you're still there in a leadership position, but not necessarily in the aircraft. So as you get a little bit higher in the ranks, your time of going to the target dwindles a little bit, but you always find a way to get out there at least once or twice during your time while you're deployed, while you're there in the command post.
And where did you retire from?
I retired from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, as kind of the place that I started with the 160th, which is a really unique thing for aviation or just being in the Army in general. I was able to spend almost 15 years of my Army career at one place, which is very fortunate.
At some point along the way, I believe you got married. How did you meet your wife?
Yeah, I met my wife when I first got to Fort Campbell, and she was going to school at Vanderbilt, which was in close proximity to Fort Campbell. It's in the city of Nashville. I was just hanging out with some friends, and one of my friends was also dating somebody at Vanderbilt, and so at some point they decided to make an introduction, and frankly, the rest is history. We started dating then, and I guess about 5 years later, after she had seen enough of what the army was like and what my career was going to be like, that she decided she would stick around and we should get married.
Do you have children along the way?
Yes, we had children, I guess, probably about 5 years after we got married. We have two boys and a girl now over that next 10 years, which was very interesting because I really felt like I was bulletproof when I was a single person doing the military life. I still felt like I was bulletproof, and I felt like I was, possibly dragging somebody along with me in my sort of, military adventures when I was married. And then when I had a child, it really changed how I saw, like, how I had my outlook on life and the effects and the results that could happen if something were to happen to me while I was deployed. So, I think that, I mean, people all over the military have very, very successful careers, and they have children, and they make it work, and they do all the great things. But I can safely say that, like, everybody's outlook on deployments and things like that change. One, after you get married, and two, especially after you have children.
Sure. How old are the kids now?
Kids are 9, 7, and 3.
Okay. So
So
we
they
we don't quite know what they're going to follow you into the military or not, huh?
No, I mean, my two boys, which are the two older of the three, they saw me deploy a few times, and they saw the base, and they saw the army post, and they saw the airfield, and they saw the aircraft, and they've gone in the simulator and some things like that. So they've seen some of that stuff, and they talk about it. And every once in a while they talk about, going into the army or becoming a pilot or something. And of course, the new Top Gun movie has shifted that to becoming a jet pilot.
Right.
Um, but yeah, and my daughter, she obviously did not. She was very, very young when I retired. So when she sees me wearing stuff, from my days in the military, she wonders, why'd you put that stuff on, Daddy? You don't do that kind of stuff. It's going to be an interesting story to tell her, when she gets a little bit older, and to let her know about what her dad did before he had to figure out what he wanted to be when he grew up.
Sure. And then so you retire from the military, and then tell me a little bit about what you're doing professionally since then.
Yeah, so I retired from the military, and I immediately walked into a job helping a good friend of mine. I just kind of helped him work with his company, and build out his company, which was a really interesting thing. It was actually in the prosthetics and orthotics arena. And as soon as I joined that company, we had a tornado in Nashville, and then 2 weeks after that, we started COVID. So a really, really perfect time to be transitioning out of the military and into a new job. We immediately started scrambling, and tried to take over all of that. Did that for about a year. The company was purchased by a global manufacturer. That's, at some point through all of that, and they basically just got rid of my position. I had been in a place where I was, being pretty successful, and doing a good job, and then they were just gonna divest my position, and that was about it. So kind of a rough welcome into the corporate world. But so then I started, trying to really figure out what I wanted to do now that I was out of the military. And I got a strange call one day from someone at Ingram Marine Group. I went over there and had a few interviews, and spoke to some really, really good people there. And I always knew about Ingram Barge Company because as I was flying up and down the Cumberland River, I would see the barges, and I would see the vessels moving those barges up and down the river. And oftentimes I wanted to land on them, honestly, just to see if I could.
That would be
But
quite a sight.
yeah, but
Would
so I
that have
knew.
would that have been on the
Go ahead.
OH-58?
That would have been in probably the Little Bird, not the OH-58, but
Okay.
they're very similar. They're very similar aircraft in size and kind of the mission. That would have been a neat thing to do. I probably gotten myself in a lot of trouble with the captain and those and those on the vessel, but it would have been a lot of fun.
How
But
much,
anyway, that's how.
how much
Go ahead.
deck do you need on a barge to land that thing?
I don't need that much space, not in a Little Bird,
Okay.
so not too much at all.
Okay. Well, sir, I thank you for your service and I do appreciate your time today.
Oh, Tim, the pleasure's mine, and frankly, it was an honor and privilege for me to serve. One of the greatest things I've done with my life. I'm certainly proud of the things I'm doing now after I've retired, but it was a great time in my life, and it certainly wasn't boring. Probably one of the most event-filled times of a career of someone joining the military just prior to 9/11 and staying engaged, constantly engaged, almost in wartime scenarios throughout his entire career. So it certainly wasn't boring. It was an honor and privilege, and I'm just glad that people like you and Americans in general have been very, very supportive of our troops as we've done this for. We were in Afghanistan for over 21 years.
Thank you very much, sir. The pleasure was mine today.
Have a great day, and see you soon.